Hello everyone, and as you can tell by the title of this video, I'm doing something a little bit different because I'm doing a full series review, and I'm going to be talking about The Land of Stories by Chris Colfer, which is a middle grade 9 to 12 fantasy fairy tale series. There are 6 books in total, so I'm going to try and be brief with each of the books that I talk about. Obviously, this is going to be a spoilery video, so if you haven't read all of the books, or if you haven't read any at all, proceed with caution. The first book in the series is The Wishing Spell, and initially I was very anxious going into this because obviously most people know Chris Colfer from his role in Glee. I know I do. And I'm always very skeptical about celebrities writing books, especially when they're fiction books, because it feels like cheating almost, because there's that fan base already there that are going to buy the book. I don't feel you can ever judge the first book in a series too harshly because it is just about setting up the world. In this book you learn about the protagonists, Alex and Connor, you learn more about their lives, their relationship to their grandma, and obviously the book, which is The Land of Stories, which they learn is the portal to all of these different fairy tale worlds. What I really loved about this book is the idea of the wishing spell, because it was the perfect way to explore all of the different lands. I just felt like it was such a clever way of doing it, and I love the twists on the fairy tale characters, in particular Snow White, how compared to the original story, the true story in this one is that she's horrible and the dwarves hated her, and so they were the ones to poison her, but they framed the evil queen. The second book in the series is The Enchanted Returns, and in this one Alex and Connor's mother goes missing and they go off on a mission to find her. And as you can tell by the title, this is where the Enchantress makes her return. And I really liked this one because you had the introduction of a real villain, and it seemed to be setting up the series for where it was going to go. The thing that really gets me though is I don't understand how the Enchantress thought that Alex's mother was Alex, because surely she would have noticed that she was way too old. Surely she knew that they were children. The third book in the series is A Grim Warning, and this is a first book where Alex and Connor take completely separate paths. You have Alex, who is training to be the next fairy godmother for the fairy tale world, and you have Connor, who has gone back to school and has gone on this school trip to Germany. And it's on this school trip that they find a time capsule from the Brothers Grimm, which reveals details of an incoming threat in the fairy tale world. This for me is where the series really peaked. I don't think it really fully recovered after this one. I like to think that the series could have ended here, but it left it on too much of an opening for it to do that. I really like the fact that the twins took completely separate paths in this, because it allowed you to get to know them individually rather than as part of a duo. The fourth book in the series is Beyond the Kingdoms, and this is by far one of my least favourites. I struggled so much to read this, and I actually nearly gave up on the series because of this book. In this one, the masked man is continuing on recruiting more people for his army, and he finds a way to go into different fairy tale worlds, and he's basically going around recruiting all of the literary villains, which I really like, that you had the good fairy tale characters on the good side and then you had fairy tale villains joining the bad side. But it just felt like the series came to a screeching halt with this one. I don't know, it just lacked that initial thing that made me really love the series, and I did restart this a good 3 or 4 times. Oh god, my books are completely in shot. And then we move on to my second least favourite in the series, which is An Author's Odyssey. I waited out another year to see whether this series would get any better, and then this book happened. For me, the charm of this series overall is the fairy tales and the twists on classic fairy tales, and I just feel like this completely went off track. I didn't feel like there needed to be the introduction of entirely new stories and entirely new characters for the sake of building up again another aspect of where the story goes in the future. I can only think that the reason that this book exists is because maybe they ran out of realistic fairy tales that could be used. I don't know. I think it was brought in, it feels like it was just brought in to add more substance to Connor's character as a writer. I just feel like this made the world a bit too big. And then the final book in the series is Wilt Clyde, which I got on my Kindle because when this came out I was on holiday and there weren't any bookstores nearby, so got the ebook. This felt like the right time for the fairy tale world and the real world to properly combine, because in this epic conclusion the fairy tale characters land in New York and basically try to take over. And I am an absolute sucker for kind of modern urban fantasy where the people in the real world don't believe in magic even though all these magical things are happening around them. It provided a lot of funny moments, and also it was absolutely hilarious seeing Red navigate herself around New York. I think without a doubt Red has got to be my favourite character throughout this series because she's just so ridiculous that it's brilliant. I'm so glad that this book was as good as it was because it really picked the series back up. Again, like I said, not to the level that A Grim Warning was at, but it was a very satisfying conclusion. Having said that, I'm not really a big fan of the kind of timeline restart things and the kind of hints that this can go on, because I feel like it was a perfect place for this to end. I didn't expect the characters to be aged up though. I didn't expect Connor to suddenly be in old age and he's at the end of a really long writing career, but I feel like that was a perfect way to kind of get across how much this series means to a lot of people and especially to a lot of children out there by adding in that kind of almost fourth wall break, talking about all these amazing adventures that the twins have had. My main issue with this, which I was talking about when I mentioned An Author's Odyssey, is that it just got too crowded. In all of the fight scenes that were happening, a lot of the time it was very hard to remember who was who and who was on what side, especially when you had the introduction in the last book of a lot of new characters in the sense of the characters from Connor's story rather than fairy tale stories. It just felt like too much was going off at once. But then again, you could argue that it wouldn't have worked if there were less characters because the point is that they're having a war. Overall though, I really did enjoy it and it did make me reflect on the series as a whole and where the storytelling went and the writing went. I do feel like the writing definitely improved a lot more than the story did in places. So as a series overall, it is not the best that I have read, it's not the worst that I have read. It wasn't consistently good. Like I said, I feel like books 4 and 5 really brought the series down, and I don't know how it could have been done differently because they kind of needed to be there for the rest of the story to work, but I just feel like it didn't need to be a 6-book series. But that doesn't take away from my full enjoyment. Would I read them again? Yes. Would I read the whole series again? No. I would probably stick to maybe the first 3 books if I was going to reread them because I have no real desire to read the rest. That's all I have to say on my series review of The Land of Stories by Chris Colfer. Have you read the series? What did you think? What was your favourite book overall? What was your least favourite? Let me know in the comments below, and as always I will be back with a new video